The sound of splintering wood echoed through the mansion, as 8-year-old Matteo Caruso's fists pounded against the closet door from the inside. His screams had turned hoarse, but the desperate chanting continued. "It's not right. It's not right. It's not right." Dominic Caruso, the most feared man in Chicago's underworld, stood helpless outside his son's bedroom, his knuckles white as he gripped the door handle. Blood seeped from fresh scratches on Matteo's arms, visible through the crack under the door where he'd clawed at himself in panic. "Boss!" "Maybe we should call the doctor again," whispered Derek, his head of security, but Dominic's dark eyes blazed with fury and desperation. 3 child psychologists, 2 psychiatrists, and countless medications had failed. His son was disappearing before his eyes. And Dominic, a man who controlled life and death with a single word, couldn't save the one person who mattered most. Then a soft voice cut through the chaos, speaking with gentle authority. "May I try? I understand patterns." Dominic turned to see Elena, the quiet Mexican-American woman who'd been working in his house for only 2 weeks. Her dark eyes held something he'd never seen in any of the expensive doctors. Genuine understanding. In that moment, with his son's cries tearing at his heart, Dominic made a decision that would change everything. Welcome to our story, a journey that invites you to witness something capable of gently reshaping the way you understand love, family, and the quiet art of healing. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment sharing where you are watching from, and remember to subscribe, because your presence and support means so much to this growing community of ours. Now, let us take the first step together into a journey that may stay with you far longer than you expect. Dominic nodded, just one single nod, but it was everything Elena needed, and Derek stepped forward with suspicion, tightening his face as he muttered that she was only a housekeeper with no credentials. Yet Dominic did not look at him. His gaze locked on Elena as if she were the last floating piece of driftwood in a sea of despair, and he whispered for them to let her try. Elena walked into the room with her heart pounding against her ribs, and instead of moving straight to the closet door, she lowered herself to the floor about 1 meter away, leaning her back against the wall, neither knocking nor trying to open anything, making no attempt to force her way in. She simply sat there, breathing steadily, speaking in a voice soft as a spring breeze. "Matteo," she said. She knew everything felt wrong, and she knew the world outside that door felt too loud and too chaotic and far too frightening. The chanting continued, yet something subtle shifted, the rhythm slowing, and Elena kept speaking, her tone gentle and even, telling him she had once been the same, hiding in closets when she was small, feeling as though everything around her was collapsing, until she found something that helped her calm her mind. Silence followed. The chanting stopped altogether. Elena smiled, though the boy could not see, and she began to count in a whisper light as breath. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34. A long pause unfurled between them. Then a trembling but curious voice emerged from inside the closet, asking if it was Fibonacci. And Elena felt her heart leap as she asked if he knew the sequence, and the boy admitted he liked those numbers because they had patterns and meaning. So did she said softly, because she saw patterns everywhere, in the way leaves aligned on branches, in seashell spirals, in the petals of a sunflower, and she asked if he saw them too, and he answered that he did, though no one else ever noticed and people called him strange. They were wrong, she told him, because he was not strange. He simply saw the world differently, just as she did. A tiny click echoed. The closet door opened by a narrow crack. Elena did not move, knowing that any sudden gesture could make him retreat, and in that thin sliver of space appeared a pair of dark brown eyes, red from crying, yet carrying a spark that was shifting from fear toward curiosity. He asked if she was like him, and Elena nodded slowly, explaining that her brain worked the way his did, needing everything in its proper place, needing patterns and order, and when something felt wrong, her world also felt as though it were falling apart. The door widened. Matteo stepped out, a small boy with tangled black hair and scraped arms, dried blood marking his skin, but the wild panic had drained from his gaze. Elena stayed seated, opening her arms not to reach for him but to offer him a choice, letting him decide for himself. He stood there studying her as though she were a problem he needed to solve. Then little by little he moved closer until he sat beside her, not within her embrace but close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, and in a voice faint as dust he asked if she would stay. She told him she would. At the doorway, Dominic stood frozen, having witnessed everything, watching his son, who had not allowed anyone near him for months, sit beside a woman he barely knew, and for the first time in months he saw something in Mateo's eyes he believed had vanished forever. Hope. 2 weeks earlier, Elena Martinez had awakened at 4 a.m. as she always did, while the city of Chicago still slept in darkness. Her tiny studio frozen with cold because she did not dare turn on the heat, every dollar holding its own weight, and she slipped into her worn cafe uniform, glanced at the deepening shadows under her eyes, feeling at 27 as though she had aged an extra decade. 2 years earlier, she had been a preschool teacher who loved her work and the children she guided each day. But when the school closed due to lack of funding, her life tumbled downward. She now worked 3 part-time jobs: mornings at the cafe, afternoons cleaning offices, evenings waiting tables, sending whatever remained after rent and minimal food back to Mexico for Abuela Rosa and her 19-year-old brother Miguel. That morning, amid the rush of her shift, her phone vibrated with a call from Mexico, and Elena stepped outside with a sinking heart, hearing her grandmother's trembling voice telling her to listen carefully, prompting Elena to ask if Miguel was all right, only to be met with a suffocating silence before Abuela explained that the doctors had discovered Miguel's heart was weaker than expected and needed surgery not in the next year but in 6 months, and without it he would not survive. Elena leaned against the wall as her knees buckled and asked for the cost, and Abuela whispered the number: $180,000. The world simply stopped. 180,000. It might as well have been 1,800,000. Elena had saved for 3 years, working herself to exhaustion, and had accumulated only 30,000, not even 1/5. She told Abuela she would find a way, begging her to reassure Miguel. And after the call ended, she stood in the alley behind the cafe with tears streaming down her cheeks, knowing her brother would die if she could not earn $150,000 in 6 months, a task that felt utterly impossible. That night, after finishing her last shift, she sat on her bed with her old laptop scrolling through endless job listings, servers, cleaners, retail, each paying minimum wage, none offering a solution. Then she saw an unusual advertisement that read, "Seeking live-in household manager, must understand the importance of order and routine. $5,000 per week." And she reread it again and again. 5,000 weekly? 20,000 monthly? A ridiculous sum no one would ever pay a domestic worker, which meant something was surely hidden beneath the surface. But she had no other choice. She called immediately. A cold male voice answered, confirming she was applying, warning he would ask questions and she must answer honestly. When he asked how she felt when objects were placed in the wrong spot, she admitted it unsettled her, that she needed order, that she had always been that way. A long silence followed before he asked if she could work with a child with special needs, and she explained she had been a preschool teacher and loved children. Another stretch of silence, then his voice returned, carrying a trace of relief as he told her she was hired and would start on Monday, promising to send the address. She protested that she did not even know whom she would be working for, and he answered simply, "The Caruso family, Gold Coast, do not be late." The call ended, and Elena stared at her phone with trembling hands, knowing nothing of the Carusos, nothing of why they offered so much money, nothing of the world she was about to enter, but for Miguel she would do anything. On Monday morning, Elena stood before the iron gate, rising more than 2 meters high, guarding the Caruso estate, feeling as though she had stepped from her own world into another entirely. For the Gold Coast, the wealthiest neighborhood in Chicago, lined with mansions worth tens of millions of dollars beneath canopies of old trees, seemed almost modest compared to the home before her, a 4-story structure of ivory limestone shaped in classical European architecture, with regal pillars and intricately curved iron balconies, security cameras positioned at every angle, and guards posted discreetly with eyes that betrayed the danger they carried. Elena drew a deep breath and pressed the bell, and the gate opened slowly as she walked along the stone path leading to the main entrance, where the door opened before she could knock, and revealed a man so tall she had to lift her gaze, nearly 2 meters in height, shoulders broad as a storage cabinet, scars crisscrossing the backs of his hands, and eyes cold enough to frost over glass swept across her from head to toe, assessing every inch, declaring without question that she was the new hire. He introduced himself as Derek Thompson, Chief of Security, and instructed her sharply to listen because he would speak only once, telling her not to touch anything unrelated to her work, not to ask anything, and not to look at anything she should not look at. And Elena nodded, trying to steady her heartbeat as he led her inside. She fought the urge to gape as the white marble floors reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers hanging from the towering ceiling, and massive oil paintings adorned the walls, pieces she was certain belonged in museums rather than private homes. while antique furniture exuded an unyielding luxury. Yet it was the smaller details her trained eyes noticed first. Books arranged by height from low to high and by color from pale to dark. Objects on tables placed at perfect angles, equidistant down to the centimeter, and sofas arranged in flawless geometric order. Someone in this house thought exactly like she did. The voice calling her name made her spine straighten on reflex. A deep sound wrapped in authority with a faint Italian lilt hinting at old power and new danger, and when Elena turned she momentarily forgot how to breathe. Dominic Caruso stood in the doorway of his study, and every instinct in her whispered that this man lived close to death. He was tall, perhaps 1.85 meters, broad across the shoulders in a perfectly tailored black suit, a white shirt, unbuttoned at the top 3 buttons, revealing a sculpted chest and a tattoo curling along his throat, a platinum Rolex gleaming as he folded his arms. Yet it was his eyes dark as concentrated espresso, sharp, intelligent, and shadowed by a buried ache that held her still. He told her she came highly recommended, though his voice carried no warmth, and explained that her job was to maintain order in the house because his son had special needs, that his routines could not be disrupted, that every item had to remain in its exact position down to the centimeter, asking if she understood. And when Elena nodded and asked if the boy struggled with autism or obsessive-compulsive tendencies, Dominic's eyes sharpened not in anger but in surprise as he asked why she thought so, and she answered that the way he described the child's needs reflected patterns she understood because she thought the same way. A brief silence settled between them, and something subtle shifted in his gaze, as though a wall had dropped by a fraction. He admitted the previous housekeepers had believed they could fix things, and Elena gently corrected him, saying that order was not fixing but creating safety. Dominic studied her for a long moment, and for the first time she saw something other than coldness in his eyes, as he told her his son's name was Matteo, 8 years old, and that his mother had left the year before, though his tone did not change even as a flash of pain crossed his dark gaze, and he confessed that the boy had not been able to adjust. At 4 p.m, the sound of a car stopping in the driveway shifted the very air of the house, and while Elena stood in the living room studying how the flowers in the vase had been arranged from lowest to highest, she heard a car door close and small footsteps on the path, though no one entered immediately after the main door opened. Instead, a small, anxious voice asked if everything was still the same. Dominic's voice softened so completely in reply that Elena could hardly believe it belonged to the same man, assuring the child that everything was exactly as it had been when he left. From a distance, Elena watched Matteo Caruso finally appear in the doorway, smaller than any 8-year-old she had ever taught, slender with black hair mirroring his father's and deep brown eyes carrying an age far too heavy for a child, and he did not step inside immediately. His lips moved silently, and Elena realized he was counting 1, 2, 3, 4, until he reached 20, only then crossing the threshold, followed by tapping the doorframe once, twice, 3 times, exactly 3 times, before adjusting the zipper of his backpack so it aligned perfectly with the seam, and only after completing every ritual did he truly enter. Elena felt her heart tighten because she understood each motion, each pattern he needed to feel safe, for she had once lived that way, and sometimes still did. Dominic gently called him over, placing a hand on his shoulder and guiding him toward Elena, introducing her as the new housekeeper. Matteo did not look at her at first, his gaze locked on the floor, shoulders tense, entire body drawn tight like a stretched violin string, and he asked if she would move his things. Elena understood immediately why he asked, knowing the previous helpers had likely reordered his belongings in ways they believed were correct, without understanding how deeply that could shatter a world like Matteo's, so she knelt slowly, aligning herself with his eye level while keeping a safe distance, assuring him softly that she would not move anything because she knew his belongings needed to stay exactly where he placed them. For the first time he looked up, his dark eyes studying hers, searching for deception, and she told him she understood because her brain worked like his, because she too needed things in the right place and felt unsettled when someone disrupted her order. Matteo tilted his head like a small bird, deciding whether to trust the hand extended toward it, asking if she truly meant it. And when she said she did, she invited him to show her his room, promising not to touch anything. He regarded her for a long moment, and then, in what Elena later learned had never happened with any stranger, he nodded and told her to follow him. Matteo's room was a masterpiece of order, toys arranged by color from red to orange to yellow to green to blue to purple, books lined by size from smallest to largest, crayons aligned in flawless rainbow spectrum, and Elena said nothing at first, letting her eyes move gently around the room before a quiet smile curved her lips as she whispered that it was beautiful. And she meant it with her whole heart, and Matteo looked at her with the first flicker of hope she had seen in his solemn young eyes. On her first night in the Caruso estate, Elena could not sleep, for the room assigned to her on the 3rd floor was more beautiful than any place she had ever lived, with its soft bed and silk sheets, yet the strangeness of it all left her restless, and near midnight she decided to walk through the house to make sure everything was in order, an old habit from her teaching days when she could not rest until every detail was settled. As she moved along the dim hallway with her footsteps cushioned by thick carpet, a sound stopped her, a small muffled cry coming from Matteo's room, and she stood before the slightly open door, unsure whether she should enter, reminding herself that this was not her place and she was only the housekeeper, yet the sound of that quiet suffering tore at her heart, and before she could think she pushed the door gently. Matteo sat curled on his bed like an abandoned kitten, clutching a picture frame tightly to his chest, tears sliding silently down his cheeks as though he had long grown accustomed to hiding his pain, and Elena stepped inside, lowering herself to the edge of the bed while keeping a respectful distance as she whispered his name and asked if she could sit with him for a while. The boy did not send her away. He only stared at the frame in his hands, and when she followed his gaze she saw a photograph of a blonde woman with a radiant smile, beautiful as a movie star. He whispered that his mother had promised she would return, that she only needed some time, and when Elena asked softly whether that was his mother because she was strikingly beautiful, he answered that she was, though he believed she had forgotten him, for his papa said she was finding herself, and he asked in a breaking voice why she could not find herself here with him. Elena felt her heart twist painfully, for she knew what it meant to be abandoned by someone you loved, and she told Matteo with quiet certainty that adults sometimes made choices that hurt the very people they cared for, but those choices were theirs, never the child's fault, never. Matteo lifted his red-rimmed, doubtful eyes toward her and asked if it was true, and she promised that it was. Looking around for a way to ease his distress, she noticed a set of building blocks on the shelf and asked if he wanted her to show him something that helped her calm down when she was sad. And when he nodded, she poured the blocks onto the floor, arranging them slowly and deliberately, first by color in a gentle gradient from darkest to lightest, forming a perfect rainbow band, then by size from the smallest to the largest in a smooth ascending curve, and finally in the Fibonacci sequence of 1, 2, 3, 5, and 8 blocks. She whispered that there was beauty in patterns, order in chaos, and that when the world grew too loud she found peace in these patterns, and Matteo slid off the bed to sit beside her, his wide eyes fixed on the shapes before him as he asked if she saw these things too, and she told him she always had, that most people did not understand them, believing children like them strange, but that did not make them wrong, only special. Then something miraculous happened, for Matteo smiled, a fleeting small smile no brighter than a falling star yet real and warm and alive, and from the doorway Dominic stood hidden in shadow watching everything, having rushed toward the sound of crying, only to stop when he saw Elena already there. He watched this woman he had hired out of desperation do in a single night what months of expensive specialists had failed to accomplish, for she made his son smile, and Dominic slipped away quietly, unable to sleep that night as he lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about Elena Martinez, the woman who had changed everything in a single day. 3 weeks passed like a dream, and the Caruso estate, once cold and tense as a museum, began to fill with the warmth of living breath, as Elena established routines perfectly suited for Matteo, rituals he could predict and trust. With breakfast at 7 arranged in the color patterns he preferred, school at 8, home at 3, homework finished before 5, playtime until 6, followed by bath, dinner, reading, and sleep, each day unfolding like a carefully composed piece of music, and under that stability Matteo blossomed. His panic attacks lessened, and then nearly disappeared. He slept better, he ate more, and most importantly, he laughed more. One morning, while Elena prepared breakfast in the kitchen, small, hurried footsteps pounded down the stairs, and Matteo burst into the room, eyes shining as he waved a sheet of paper like a victory flag, shouting that he had earned an A on his math test, and Elena wiped her hands on her apron and knelt to him, asking what the test had covered, and he answered patterns and sequences, and told her that he had used the Fibonacci sequence she had taught him, and that his teacher said it was the most creative solution he had ever seen. Elena hugged Matteo, pride swelling in her chest, so completely that she forgot for a moment she was only the housekeeper, feeling instead as though she belonged in this home and with this child. From the hallway, Dominic's voice drifted from his office, cold as ice and entirely unlike the gentle tone he used with Matteo, as he demanded to know why a shipment that should have arrived on Tuesday was missing and ordered someone named Vinny to find it. Elena had heard that name many times in the past 3 weeks, in calls, messages, and late-night meetings, and though she did not know who he was, it was clear he belonged to Dominic's world, the world she avoided asking about, the world of men in expensive suits arriving at strange hours and calls that drew Dominic away from dinner, and the quiet menace in Derek's eyes whenever guests appeared. She knew better than to be curious, for she was paid $5,000 a week to maintain order and care for Matteo, not to ask about her employer's business. Matteo whispered that his papa sounded angry again, and Elena stroked his hair, telling him his papa had a stressful job and that it had nothing to do with him. But Matteo murmured that his mama had said his papa was always angry and that was why she had to leave, that she could not live with that anger. Elena's heart tightened, sensing something amiss in this story, for she had seen Dominic with his son, seen the endless gentleness he held for him, and a man like that could not be the reason a wife abandoned her family. Something else had happened, though Elena did not ask, not yet. Instead, she only held Matteo closer and whispered that whatever had happened, none of it was ever his fault. One quiet afternoon, Elena sat beside Matteo in his room helping him with his homework, while the late sunlight poured through the window in warm golden streaks across the floor, and everything felt peaceful until Matteo suddenly stopped writing and looked up at her with hesitant eyes, asking if he could tell her a secret, and insisting she promise not to tell his papa. A request that made Elena's heart tighten because secrets children hid from their parents were rarely harmless, yet his trust was too precious to break, so she promised. Matteo inhaled deeply as though bracing himself to leap from a cliff, and whispered that his mama had not simply left, but was staying with someone else. And when Elena's body stiffened and she gently asked what he meant, he said he had seen them in his papa's room while his papa was away on a business trip, and when she asked softly whom he had seen, though she already feared the answer, he whispered that it was his mama and Uncle Vinny. The world seemed to stop, and Elena felt as though someone had driven the air from her lungs. For Vinny was the man Dominic called every day, the man he described as his right hand, his brother, and he had betrayed Dominic in the worst way, in his own house. Matteo continued in a trembling voice that he had believed telling his papa would help fix everything, that his papa could talk to his mama and make her stay because he only wanted his family together. But when he told his papa what he had seen, his mama left the very next day without hugging him, without saying goodbye, simply vanished, and tears streamed down his small face as he confessed he believed it was his fault, that if he had stayed silent she might still be here and his papa would not be so sad, that everything was because of him. Elena did not speak. She gathered him into her arms, holding him as if she could shield him from every hurt in the world, letting him cry and shed the weight he had been carrying for a year, and when the sobs softened, she lifted his face gently and looked into his reddened eyes, telling him with steady tenderness that none of it was his fault, never his fault, that telling the truth had been the right thing, that adults were responsible for their own decisions, not children. She hugged him again, though her mind began assembling pieces of a darker picture. Vinny, the man Dominic trusted completely, had betrayed him, yet still called daily, still attended meetings, still laughed as though nothing had happened. And Elena wondered whether Dominic knew and did nothing or whether he did not know at all, and whether she should tell him. And she wondered what Vinny wanted now as she realized she was standing in the middle of a tragedy far more complicated than she had imagined and sensed nothing would end peacefully. That night Elena could not sleep, Matteo's secret swirling in her mind like an unending storm, the image of Vinny betraying his closest friend, the image of Matteo carrying this burden alone for a year, believing he had destroyed his family. And when she glanced at the clock reading 2 a.m, she went downstairs to get water, hoping it would calm her. But as she descended barefoot, trying not to make noise, a faint light from the living room made her stop. Someone was awake. She turned to leave, but a voice cut through the darkness asking if she could not sleep, and she turned to find Dominic sitting in the armchair by the window with a glass of whiskey in his hand, moonlight tracing the hard lines of his face, his vest gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal ink on his forearm, and he looked exhausted, yet more dangerous than ever. She replied gently that she could ask him the same, and he told her to call him Dominic because 2 a.m. was far too late for formalities, gesturing for her to sit and offering her a drink. Elena knew she should refuse, should return to her room and maintain distance, but something in his eyes tonight, a loneliness she recognized in herself, dismantled her caution, and she sat. He poured her a glass of expensive whiskey, its deep amber color and complex aroma unmistakable, and she sipped it slowly, warmth sliding down her throat as he asked her to tell him about herself, about where she came from and her family. She was surprised, for no one had asked about her in almost a month. She was merely the housekeeper, a shadow who kept order. She told him she had grown up in Chicago, but her family was in Mexico. Her grandmother, Abuela Rosa, and her brother Miguel, who was 19 and had been born with a heart condition requiring surgery. She did not know why she revealed this. Perhaps because at 2 a.m. barriers blur and truth comes easier. And when he asked the cost and she answered $180,000, explaining she had saved for 3 years and had only $30,000, he pointed out quietly that this was why she took the job, which she admitted. And when he asked why she told him, she said she did not know. Perhaps because it was 2 a.m. and he had asked. Silence settled between them like a warm blanket. Not uncomfortable, but intimate. Dominic finally spoke, saying Mateo had not smiled like that in months and that she had given him something Dominic himself could not, but she told him he gave his son stability, and she merely spoke the same language Mateo did. Dominic disagreed, saying she truly saw the boy, and she replied that he was easy to see because he was wonderful, to which Dominic answered bitterly that his mother had not thought so, believing Mateo broken and defective, wanting to send him to boarding school for someone else to handle. Anger rose in Elena's chest because no mother should think that of her child, and she told Dominic that Mateo was not broken, only different, and those were not the same. Dominic looked at her then, and for the first time she saw softness in his usually cold eyes, something like gratitude, admiration, and perhaps something more dangerous, and the space between them felt smaller. The dim light carved shadows across Dominic's face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw and the depth of his eyes, and Elena realized he was looking at her, truly looking, as though trying to decipher a painting, and he lifted his hand slowly toward her cheek. She did not move, did not breathe, her heart thundering, but just before his fingers touched her skin, he stopped, his hand falling as he whispered that she should go to bed. Elena rose on unsteady legs, walking toward the stairs, but at the threshold she turned back toward the man sitting in darkness and told him softly that whatever was keeping him awake, he did not have to bear it alone. She did not wait for his reply as she climbed the stairs, leaving him in the quiet room with his whiskey and restless thoughts. But both of them knew something had shifted that night. A boundary blurred, erased, and no amount of pretending could make it unseen again. The next morning, the doorbell rang as Elena was preparing breakfast, and through the window she saw a sleek black Mercedes parked at the gate, the kind of car she had only seen in movies about the wealthy and powerful, and Derek stepped out to open the door just as a man entered with the confidence of someone who believed he owned the world. Vincent Russo. Vinny. At last she saw the face behind the name she had heard for weeks, a man around 38, handsome in the polished way of a Hollywood actor, with neatly combed black hair and an expensive gray suit, fitted perfectly to his strong frame, his smile wide and bright, the kind meant to make anyone feel welcome. Yet Elena noticed one thing immediately: that smile never reached his eyes. For Vinny's green eyes were icy, calculating, always watching and measuring. He called out, "Dom," with arms wide as Dominic emerged from his office, greeting him as his brother, and they embraced with the strong backslapping men often used. But from her spot in the kitchen, Elena saw something unusual in the stiff way. Dominic returned the gesture, as though he were embracing a snake he could not afford to drop. Dominic remarked on Vinny's early arrival, and Vinny replied he missed the little guy, just as Mateo appeared on the stairs, intending to run down to greet Elena as he always did, until he saw Vinny and froze, his small body curling in on itself like a frightened animal confronting a predator. Vinny strode toward him with arms open, insisting he had missed the boy, but Mateo stepped back and clutched the banister, fear deep and wordless in his eyes. And when Dominic gently urged him to greet his Uncle Vinny, the boy whispered a greeting without lifting his gaze from the floor. Vinny laughed, as if unaware of the child's discomfort. Then his eyes swept the room and landed on Elena, and he commented that she was the new housekeeper, prettier than the last ones, letting his gaze travel slowly and shamelessly over her body in a way that made her feel stripped bare, her hand tightening on the dish towel to steady the rising nausea. Dominic's voice cooled as he said she was good with Mateo, and that this was all that mattered, and Vinny agreed with a smile, insisting family came first. The two men entered the office while Elena took Mateo upstairs to prepare for school, but as she passed the hallway, voices drifted from the half-closed office door, Vinny speaking excitedly about the Castellano deal being ready, $50 million, but noting that Dominic seemed distracted lately, and Dominic replied flatly that his son needed him, to which Vinny answered with assurance that he was handling everything, insisting Dominic could trust him as always. And after a long silence, Dominic agreed, saying Vinny had always been there, though something in his tone carried hesitation, doubt tucked beneath calm acceptance. Elena walked away with her heart hammering, for she had seen Matteo shrink from Vinny, had heard the boy's heartbreaking secret, and now had looked directly into the smiling face of the betrayer. Vinny spoke smoothly, laughed easily, embraced Dominic like a brother, but Elena saw the truth behind his charm. The way he said, "Trust me," in the same tone a liar uses to cover guilt, and she did not know whether Dominic sensed any of it, but she knew with certainty that Vincent Russo was a danger, and he was standing inside the heart of this family. 2 weeks after Vinny's visit, life inside the Caruso estate shifted in ways no one had predicted. Elena was no longer just the housekeeper, but had become part of the family, a vital piece of Matteo's world and, unspoken but undeniable, of Dominic's as well. Matteo blossomed, now able to eat breakfast without checking the placement of each item 3 times, able to leave for school without completing 20 ritual steps, even beginning to play with other children at school, something his teacher called nothing short of miraculous. One Saturday afternoon, Elena decided to teach Matteo how to bake cookies, and the expansive kitchen with its untouched high-end appliances filled with laughter and the scent of melting butter, flour dusting the marble counter, eggs spilled onto the floor, chocolate smudged from Matteo's nose to his chin, the most beautiful chaos the house had ever held. Matteo laughed about adding too much flour, and Elena smiled, telling him mistakes sometimes made things perfect, as she sprinkled more flour on the counter, unaware of the footsteps behind her or that Dominic had come home early and now stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching them with an expression she had never seen before, an expression full of longing and something like hope. Elena sent Matteo to the pantry for more chocolate chips, and when she turned she finally saw Dominic, her heart stuttering as she took in the sight of him without a suit and tie, in a simple white shirt with sleeves rolled, looking more human than she had ever seen him, yet watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. He told her she had flour on her face and stepped toward her, closer than the boundary she should maintain, reaching up to wipe the streak of flour gently from her cheek, his hand lingering, warm against her skin, his thumb brushing softly along her cheekbone. Elena whispered that she knew, though she should have stepped back, remembering he was her employer and she his housekeeper, remembering he was a mafia boss and she a young woman trying to save her brother. Yet she could not move, did not want to move, and Dominic lowered his face toward hers slowly. Giving her time to flee, though, she remained still, his lips hovering mere centimeters from hers, his breath warm against her skin, her heart pounding wildly, blood rushing in her ears, when her phone suddenly rang. They jerked apart as though shocked, and Elena fumbled for the phone, seeing an unfamiliar number from Mexico, whispering that she needed to answer, and Dominic, voice rough, told her to take the call. She answered with shaking hands, and when the doctor on the line introduced himself as Dr. Ramirez from the General Hospital and said Miguel was stable but could not wait any longer for surgery, that 4 weeks was all they had before it would be too late, Elena felt her knees give out, for she thought they had 6 months, and the doctor apologized as she ended the call with trembling fingers. 4 weeks. $180,000. She had $30,000. She needed $150,000 in 4 weeks. Impossible. Completely impossible. Her brother would die. She ran from the kitchen, out the back door, into the vast garden, collapsing against an old oak tree as her legs failed her, sobbing until she could no longer breathe, mourning the truth that despite 3 years of relentless work and 3 jobs, she had not saved enough, that Miguel would die because she had failed, her little brother whom she had vowed to protect. She did not know how long she cried before a shadow appeared beside her, and Dominic sat quietly next to her, saying nothing, simply being there, and when she lifted her tear-stained face to him, she saw in his eyes not pity but resolve. "Elena." Dominic's voice was gentle yet unwavering as he asked what had happened, and Elena could not look at him, ashamed to let her employer see her in such a broken, fragile state, yet the tears would not stop, and she no longer had the strength to hold anything in. She whispered that it was her brother, that the surgery could not wait, that she had 4 weeks, only 4 weeks to find $150,000, and she told him she had tried, had worked for 3 relentless years, but it was not enough, would never be enough, and she covered her face as her shoulders shook, crying that Miguel would die because she did not have the money, that her little brother would die. Silence stretched before Dominic spoke with a calm, decisive voice, telling her he could help, and when she lifted her tear-filled eyes in confusion, he said he could transfer the $150,000 the next day. Elena shook her head and backed away, saying she could not accept such an enormous sum, could never repay it, not in an entire lifetime. But Dominic told her not to repay it, and when she asked why he would do such a thing for her, a simple housekeeper he barely knew, she saw something in his dark eyes she had never seen before: sincerity, care, and perhaps something deeper. He told her she had saved his son, had given Matteo back a smile he believed was lost forever, had given the boy the feeling of being understood for the first time, and he asked whether that was worth the money because to him the money was not enough. He asked if she thought he paid $5,000 a week to an ordinary housekeeper, and said he had known she was different from the moment they spoke on the phone, though he had not known how different until now, and Elena's heart pounded as she stared at her trembling hands, trying to gather her thoughts. Dominic said Matteo was everything to him, and she was becoming something too, something he could not name, but he knew he did not want to lose her. When Elena asked what that something was, he did not answer, only looked at her with an intensity that made her feel seen to her core, and he asked her to let him help, begging softly. She knew what accepting the money meant: debt, entanglement, a bond to a man she understood was dangerous. But this was her brother's life, the child she had held the day he was born, the child she had promised her mother on her deathbed she would always protect. Elena finally whispered that she would find a way to pay him back somehow, even if it took her whole life. But Dominic said he did not want money, only one thing: for her to stay. She stopped breathing as he told her to stay here with Matteo and with him, and he lifted his hand to wipe her tears, this time not pulling away as he asked if she could do that. Elena looked into his eyes and saw the loneliness he had hidden for so long, the pain of a father fighting alone for his child, the man trying to hold on to light in the darkness surrounding him, and she nodded, telling him she would stay. In that moment, beneath the old oak tree in the vast garden, with Dominic's warm hand still cupping her cheek, Elena knew she had crossed a boundary she could never uncross, and strangely she felt no regret. That night everything changed so quickly she could barely understand it. Dominic kept his promise, and within hours the money was sent to the hospital in Mexico, and by morning Abuela Rosa called to say Miguel's surgery was scheduled for the following week, that he would live, and Elena cried again, this time tears of joy. That evening, once Matteo had fallen asleep, Dominic summoned her to his study, the grand room with towering bookshelves and the massive oak desk seeming suddenly small with the two of them standing face to face. He told her he needed to explain who he really was and what he did, and Elena waited as he confessed he was not a businessman, not a lawful one, and looked her directly in the eyes, as though preparing for rejection. Elena told him softly she already knew, for she had lived in Chicago her whole life and knew the Caruso name and the stories people whispered, and when Dominic asked if she still stayed, she answered that she did, and silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable, until he released a long breath like a man shedding a burden carried for years. Dominic admitted he had done terrible things, harmed others, destroyed lives, that he was not a good man, and when Elena asked why he told her this, he said that if there was any chance for them, she needed to know the truth, needed to know who she was becoming involved with. She stepped closer, closing the distance they had fought for weeks to maintain, telling him she knew who he was, had always known, and when he asked why she was not running, she asked if she should, to which he said perhaps, and she whispered that she did not want to. Dominic looked at her, eyes heavy with emotions too complex to name, then reached for her, pulling her close, and their lips met. The kiss was not gentle but filled with longing, pain, and promise, a release of two lonely souls finally finding one another, and Elena felt the strength of his arms, the softness beneath his hardness, the wild heartbeat pressed against her chest. When they parted, breathless, Dominic murmured that he did not deserve her, and she told him to let her decide whom she deserved. They sat on the sofa shoulder to shoulder as he began to speak about Bianca, the wife he had once loved deeply, about a marriage that had broken long before it ended, telling her that Bianca had not simply left but had left with his closest friend. Elena's heart tightened, for she had known this from Matteo, but hearing it from Dominic made it sharper, more painful, and when she softly said Vinny's name, Dominic's eyes flashed as he asked how she knew, and she told him Matteo had seen them together in Dominic's room while he was away. Dominic's face hardened, his jaw clenching and fury igniting in his dark eyes as he growled that the bastard had made his son believe it was his fault, and when Elena asked if he had known about Vinny and Bianca, he said he had always known but could not accept it, did not want to believe that the man he had grown up with, trusted more than himself, had done such a thing. When she asked why he had done nothing, Dominic said he was waiting for the right moment, that Vinny thought he did not know, and that gave him an advantage. Elena did not understand all of it, but she understood Dominic Caruso was not a man easily deceived, and that a traitor would not escape punishment. She told him Matteo had blamed himself for an entire year, believing speaking the truth had driven his mother away, and Dominic closed his eyes in pain, promising he would talk to his son and tell him it had never been his fault. Elena rested her head on his shoulder, and Dominic wrapped his arm around her, the two of them sitting together in silence, two battered souls finding peace in one another's arms. She knew the path ahead would not be easy, that Dominic's world was full of danger and darkness, but in that moment, held in his warmth, she did not care. For the first time in a long time she felt she belonged somewhere. 3 nights later, Elena woke at 3 in the morning and realized Dominic was no longer beside her. The space where he had lain cold enough to show he had been gone for some time, and she rose, pulled on her robe, and went to look for him. The mansion silent in the dark, except for a thin line of light beneath the door of his first-floor study. She descended the stairs with soft steps, and as she neared the study she heard voices through the partially open door, not just Dominic's but a woman's as well, and although she knew she should not listen, something rooted her in place. Pressing herself against the wall, she heard Dominic's low, tense voice telling Agent Chen that he had given her everything: bank accounts, transport routes, names, and the woman's cold professional tone answering that they needed more, that Vinny was the key, and Dominic replying that he knew Vinny was operating behind his back. She mentioned the Castellano deal, and Dominic said Vinny was using it to build his own network and pull Dominic's men away, and the woman told him that if he handed Vinny over they would honor the agreement, a new identity, protection, a clean slate. Dominic added, for Matteo, and for Elena. And Elena's heart stopped as she heard her own name, and the woman confirmed they were part of the deal. Elena stepped back in shock, her foot bumping a porcelain vase that wobbled and fell to the floor with a shattering crash. Dominic called her name instantly and told her to come in, leaving her no choice. She pushed the door open, her heart pounding, and saw Dominic standing beside his desk opposite an Asian woman in her 40s in a black suit with a neat bun and sharp, assessing eyes. Elena whispered shakily, asking if he was working with the FBI, and the woman stepped forward with visible irritation, saying the information was classified before Dominic cut her off firmly, insisting Elena needed to know in case anything went wrong. After a long look, the agent nodded and stepped out, leaving the two of them in heavy silence. Elena asked how long, her voice barely a breath, and Dominic answered 6 months, saying he had been an informant for the FBI for 6 months. And when she asked why, he told her it was for Matteo's future, that he did not want his son growing up in this world, always watching his back, always afraid of a knock at the door, that he wanted to give the boy a normal life. Elena reeled at the truth that Dominic Caruso, the Mafia king of Chicago, was working with the FBI to bring down his own empire. And when she asked why he had not told her, he said the fewer people who knew, the safer everyone was, especially her, because if Vinny discovered anything or anyone in the organization sensed the truth, she would be the first target, and he could not allow that. When she asked what happened now that she knew, Dominic told her she was part of the plan, that the FBI would protect her and Matteo when everything ended, give them new identities and new lives in a place no one could find. Elena stared at him as the scale of it all sank in. It was not just family drama or betrayal, it was life and death, where a single misstep could cost them everything, and she asked what would happen to him. Dominic did not answer, only pulled her into his arms and held her tightly as though afraid she might vanish, and in the silence Elena understood the answer was not one she wished to hear. A week passed after Elena discovered Dominic's secret, the days outwardly normal, yet she could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. Dominic worked more, late-night calls stretched longer, and his eyes carried a worry he could not hide. On Monday morning everything began as usual, with Elena preparing breakfast for Matteo, arranged in the color patterns he loved. Dominic came down, kissed Matteo's forehead, then brushed a gentle kiss across Elena's lips, telling her he had meetings all day and that Derek would pick them up at 3. Elena told him to be careful, stroking his cheek, and he said always, but the way he looked at her lingered a moment too long, as if memorizing her face. Elena drove Matteo to school along their familiar route, while he chattered excitedly in the back seat about his new science project, asking if she thought fireflies used the Fibonacci sequence in their light patterns, because he had read many things in nature followed that rule, and Elena began to answer when a black car suddenly shot out from an alley, cutting across their path. She slammed the brakes, tires screeching on asphalt, and before she could react, 2 more cars boxed them in from behind. Matteo asked nervously what was happening just as the front car's door opened, and Vincent Russo stepped out in his gray suit, with his familiar smile that never warmed his icy eyes. Elena felt her blood freeze as she asked what he was doing there, and Vinny said plans had changed. That Uncle Vinny was taking Mateo out today. Stepping closer, Elena flung open her door and planted herself between him and the back seat, demanding he step away. But the cold laugh he gave chilled her as he asked if she thought she could order him around, and at his nod 2 large men appeared from the other cars. They shoved her aside with brutal force. She fell hard on the sidewalk, her knee slamming into concrete. She screamed for them not to touch Mateo, but it was too late. One man opened the back door and hauled the boy out as he kicked and screamed, tiny against the giant gripping him. Mateo cried that he was scared, calling desperately for Elena, as Vinny shushed him with a sickening false sweetness, saying everything would be fine and they were just taking a little trip. Elena scrambled to her feet but was shoved down again, her jeans torn and soaked with blood from her knee. Vinny ordered his men to take the boy, then crouched beside Elena with that same smiling mask as he told her to deliver a message to Dominic. He had 24 hours, the deal with the FBI canceled, or he would never see his son again. Elena gasped, asking how he knew, and Vinny cut her off coldly, saying he always knew, asking if Dominic thought he was stupid, reminding her he had built that empire with Dominic, that he knew everything happening in the organization, including Dominic's conversations with the federal dogs. Elena begged him to spare Mateo, saying the boy was innocent, but Vinny said Dominic should have thought of that before betraying his family, then stood and brushed off his trousers before repeating that Dominic had 24 hours and warning her not to involve the police, because if he saw any sign of federal agents, the boy would die. The black cars sped away with Mateo inside, his terrified cries muffled behind closed windows, fading beneath the roar of engines until they vanished at the end of the street. Elena lay on the cold pavement watching the cars disappear, feeling the world collapse beneath her as the child she loved like her own was taken by the man who had betrayed them all, leaving him frightened and alone in enemy hands. Forcing herself upright despite the pain and bleeding knee, Elena ran toward the Caruso estate, ran toward Dominic because every second that passed was a second Mateo's life hung in the balance. Elena burst into the Caruso mansion, the door slamming against the wall with a resounding crash as she screamed Dominic's name, her voice hoarse from crying and running, and Dominic appeared from his study within seconds, his face tightening at the sight of her bloodied knee and tear-streaked face as he demanded to know what had happened and where Mateo was, his voice still controlled but his eyes darkening by the moment. And when Elena gasped that Vinny had taken the boy, that he knew about the FBI and everything else, that he had given Dominic 24 hours to cancel the deal or never see his son again, a silence fell that was far more terrifying than rage, and when she looked at Dominic she saw something primal and dark and almost feral, the madness of a father whose child had been threatened, and he turned and drove his fist into the massive mirror on the wall, shattering it into a rain of glass that clattered across the marble floor as blood streamed from his knuckles, and he roared that he would kill Vinny with his bare hands, until Elena moved toward him in fear for his injured hand, and he snapped that he did not care about his hand, before softening instantly and apologizing, just as Derek rushed in with 3 other men, all looking ready for war. Derek reported that traffic cameras had picked up Vinny's car heading south, and Dominic ordered every loyal man assembled, every contact in the police alerted, every trace of Vinny uncovered. When Derek asked about the FBI, Dominic snarled for him to call Chen, and when the agent picked up, Dominic informed her that Vinny had taken Mateo, and she replied with unsettling calm that they knew and had been tracking him, that he was at an old warehouse on the city's south side, and even hinted it could be their chance. But Dominic roared he did not care about her case, only his son, and she answered that they could have both if he trusted her. Dominic ended the call abruptly and ordered the cars prepared within 15 minutes. And when Elena seized his arm saying she was going with him, he refused instantly, saying it was impossible, saying it was too dangerous. But she insisted Mateo was terrified and needed someone who understood him, that she needed to be there, that he could forbid her but she would find her own way regardless. And Dominic stared at her, torn between protecting her and accepting the truth of her words, before finally agreeing that she could come but must stay behind Derek no matter what, and had to promise him. And when she did, he nodded and turned to his men, declaring they had 24 hours according to Vinny, but they would not wait, that everything would end that night. The convoy sped into the deepening Chicago night while Elena sat beside Dominic, watching the lights stream past the windows and praying to anything listening that they were not too late, because Mateo was waiting and she would do anything to bring him home. The warehouse stood on the southern edge of the city, crumbling red brick and shattered windows, and the cars stopped several hundred yards away, in the shadow of an unlit alley. Dominic turned to Elena with eyes full of unspoken emotion and reminded her of his instructions. And she repeated that she would stay behind Derek no matter what happened, her voice trembling but resolved, and Dominic kissed her forehead, a brief kiss filled with meaning, like both a promise and a farewell, before telling Derek that he was going in alone, according to the plan arranged with the FBI, that they were to bring Elena through the back entrance only after his signal. Despite clear reluctance, Derek obeyed as Dominic disappeared into the warehouse's rusted steel door like a predator moving into its hunting ground. Inside, Vinny waited beneath the cavernous ceiling and crumbling concrete columns, 4 armed men flanking him, and far off in a shadowed corner, Mateo sat huddled on the cold concrete, rocking and whispering to himself, murmuring, "Wrong, wrong, wrong." And Elena's heart clenched when she heard it through the earpiece Derek had given her, realizing he was deep in a panic attack with no one to guide him. Vinny greeted Dominic with open arms and a mocking grin, pretending warmth as he taunted him and warned him not to have done anything foolish like calling the FBI, and Dominic demanded he release his son, but Vinny insisted they talk, circling him with echoing footsteps as he accused Dominic of weakness, claiming he had built the empire while Dominic sat in an office, mocking his trust, throwing Bianca's betrayal in his face, bragging that she had come to him because he offered what Dominic could not. And when Dominic asked quietly what he wanted now, Vinny answered simply, "Everything power, respect, the throne Dominic had never deserved." While Dominic kept him occupied, Elena and Derek moved toward the back door where the FBI waited for the signal. But Elena could no longer wait as she heard Mateo's trembling whispers grow more frantic, and she slipped ahead of Derek, moving through the warehouse shadows, avoiding the attention of the armed men, focused entirely on Dominic, and reached Mateo in the dark corner where he sat with eyes squeezed shut and body shaking. Whispering his name, she knelt beside him, telling him she was there, but he did not react, repeating that everything was wrong. So she offered him the pattern that always calmed him, counting softly, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. And his whispers slowed as his eyes opened, swollen with tears but recognizing her, and when she told him they would leave together if he stayed quiet and followed her, he nodded and clutched her hand. At that moment the world exploded into light as flood lamps blazed through the warehouse. A helicopter roared overhead, and a voice thundered through a loudspeaker announcing the FBI and ordering everyone to freeze. Vinny spun around and saw Mateo in Elena's arms, his face twisting with rage as he screamed and raised his gun. But Dominic hurled himself across the floor, tackling Elena and Mateo and shielding them with his body just as a shot cracked through the air, and before Vinny could fire again, a sniper's bullet tore through his shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground. The FBI swept in like a wave, subduing the remaining gunmen as the warehouse filled with shouts, metal cuffs clacking, and echoing commands. But Elena heard none of it, only the sound of Dominic's arms tightening around her and Mateo, the boy sobbing into his father's chest as he cried for him, and Dominic whispering that he was there, that everything was all right, telling him that Elena had found him as she always did, and Mateo nodded before wrapping his arms around both of them. For the first time, in the midst of danger and chaos, they were a family. Yet when Elena looked up, she saw Agent Chen approaching with an expression that made it clear their ordeal was far from over. Outside the warehouse, the flashing lights of police cruisers and ambulances washed over the night like a sea of red and blue, and Vinny was strapped onto a stretcher with his wounded shoulder bandaged hastily, one hand cuffed to the metal rail while his accomplices were led away one by one, their heads bowed beneath the weight of defeat. Mateo was examined by medics who confirmed he had no physical injuries, only minor scrapes and the lingering terror that still clung to his eyes, and Elena held him tightly, refusing to let go for even a second, as if afraid he might vanish again the moment she loosened her grip, kissing the top of his head and whispering reassurances while her eyes searched for Dominic, who stood a few yards away speaking with Agent Chen, his face taut beneath the pulsing lights, until Elena watched Chen nod and say something that made Dominic close his eyes as though he had just taken a blow to the stomach, and Elena heard Chen's voice drift toward her saying that it was time, words that sent a chill racing through her blood because she did not yet know what time meant. Dominic turned and walked toward them, each step heavier than the last, and when he reached Elena and Mateo, she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before, a quiet resignation, the agony of a decision that could not be undone. And he knelt before Mateo, brushing a hand gently through the boy's messy dark hair, as he told him in a soft voice that he had to go away for a while, prompting Mateo's eyes to widen, as he protested that his father had just saved him, and why would he have to leave now? And Dominic explained that he had done bad things, wrong things, and now he had to take responsibility for them. Elena felt her knees weaken as she looked at him in confusion and pleading, asking what he meant, what was happening, and Dominic rose, taking her hand and guiding her a short distance away so they could speak privately while still remaining within Matteo's sight, reminding her of the agreement with the FBI, how his information would protect her and Matteo, and when she said she remembered, he continued, telling her that it did not mean he was free, because he had led a criminal organization for 15 years, and that reality did not disappear simply because he had helped them capture Vinny, and when she asked how long he had to serve, his voice dropped as he answered 5 years, perhaps less if he continued cooperating. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. 5 years meaning Matteo would be 13 when his father returned. 5 years meaning she would have to live without him for all that time. And Dominic reached into his pocket and placed a small red device in her palm, a compact emergency button like a car key fob, explaining that if she ever felt unsafe, she need only press it, and the FBI would come immediately, and when she whispered his name, he pressed on quickly as though afraid hesitation might break him, saying he had prepared everything, that there were bank accounts for her and Matteo, new identities, a house in Oregon far from Chicago, and far from the world he had once commanded. And when she asked if he had planned all of this, he said he had planned for every possibility except one, the pain of leaving her. He cupped her cheek, wiping away her tears as he told her he loved her, that he knew he had no right to say it, that he was leaving her with a storm of chaos, a child who still needed healing, and a life that would have to be rebuilt from the ground up. And Elena cut him off through her tears, telling him he had every right, that he had the right to love and be loved, that neither he nor Matteo was broken, and when she said she loved him too, calling him a fool, Dominic's voice cracked as he asked if she truly loved him, and she told him she had loved him since the night he let her see his pain, since he trusted her with Matteo, and that she would go on loving him for 5 years, for 10 years, for her entire life if necessary, drawing him down into a kiss that was nothing like their first, this one salted with tears and sweet with promise and aching with farewell. When they pulled apart, Dominic returned to Matteo, who stood there with tear-reddened eyes already understanding too much, and the boy cried and flung himself into his father's arms, begging him not to go, saying he did not want a new life without him. And Dominic knelt and held him tightly, telling him that courage meant doing the right thing even when it hurt, telling him he was doing this for Matteo and for Elena, telling him he loved him more than anything in the world, and that was why he had to let him go, kissing his forehead before looking back at Elena. And when 2 FBI agents approached with polite but firm determination, Dominic rose and allowed them to cuff him, and before they led him away, he turned back to Elena and said that what he had told her about loving her was true and would always be true. And she answered that she knew and that she would be there when he returned, promising him. And he told her to take care of the boy for him, and she said she would, asking him in return to take care of himself. And Dominic nodded and turned away. Elena stood there, Matteo in her arms, watching the man she loved being escorted through a corridor of flashing patrol cars, and Matteo looked up at her with swollen eyes and asked whether they would ever see his father again. And Elena kissed his head and pulled him closer, telling him yes, they would, because his father had promised, and he always kept his promises. That night, standing amid the blur of lights and fading sirens, she understood that their story was not ending but merely moving into a new chapter. 2 years later, in Portland, Oregon, their small 3-bedroom house sat at the end of a quiet street lined with maple trees, with a neat garden in front and a white wooden fence embracing the yard. Nothing like the marble floors and crystal chandeliers of the Chicago mansion, but every bit a home, theirs. And Matteo was now 10 years old, taller and stronger than the thin, a terrified boy who had once crouched inside a closet, his room painted a calming shade of blue with tidy shelves and a desk by the window overlooking the garden, still loving patterns and still arranging his belongings a certain way, but no longer imprisoned by the routines that once ruled him. The panic attacks long gone, the friendships at school growing, his teachers admiring his intelligence and sensitivity, and above all, he knew how to laugh. Elena, too, had changed. Now a senior studying child development at Portland University with a promising future ahead, her legal identity firmly established thanks to Agent Chen's diligence. No longer the girl juggling 3 part-time jobs to send money home to Mexico, but a woman who had survived a storm and found her harbor, while Miguel had recovered fully from his surgery and was now a 21-year-old college sophomore in California, who called her weekly to talk about campus life and the pretty girls in his classes, and Abuela Rosa had moved in with them once Miguel began college, claiming Elena needed someone to cook proper Mexican food and she herself needed someone to fuss over. On that Saturday morning, the house hummed with the warmth of ordinary life, as Elena prepared breakfast, while Abuela sipped coffee and scrolled through news in Spanish, and Mateo ran downstairs with damp hair complaining that the blueberries refused to stay aligned on his plate, which made Elena laugh as she smoothed his hair and told him imperfection could sometimes make things more beautiful. And Mateo tilted his head thoughtfully before saying his father would call that poetic, to which Elena answered that he truly would, her heart tightening the way it always did when Mateo mentioned Dominic. And though their table always held 4-place settings because Mateo insisted on it, saying they had to be ready for when his father came home, no one argued. Agent Chen still contacted them regularly with updates, reporting that Dominic's cooperation had helped dismantle 3 major criminal organizations, and that he might be released early, though 6 months had passed since that hopeful call, and they were still waiting. When Mateo asked quietly whether his father remembered them, Elena told him he did every single day just as they remembered him. And when Mateo cheerfully accused Abuela of teaching him Spanish curse words, Elena shot her grandmother a mock stern look while Abuela shrugged innocently and said she was simply preparing the boy for his father's return. Then the doorbell rang, unexpected and sharp in the calm of the early Saturday morning, and Mateo raced to the entryway before Elena could follow. She caught up as he stood on tiptoe to peer through the peephole, then froze and whispered for her to come, his voice trembling, and Elena placed a hand on his shoulder and looked herself. Her heart stopped. Agent Chen stood on the porch in her familiar black suit, but she was not alone. Behind her, bathed in the soft Portland morning light, stood a man thinner than she remembered, his hair longer, new lines etched around his eyes. But those deep, dark eyes were unchanged, the eyes she had seen in her dreams for 2 long years. And with trembling hands, Elena opened the door, and the voice she had missed every single day came to her, warm and low and rough, saying, "Hello, Elena." The door opened, and time seemed to stop as Elena stood there looking at the man she had loved and waited for through 2 long, aching years. Dominic thinner than before, with harsher lines carved into his face, his dark hair longer and streaked with silver at the temples, yet his eyes unchanged, still deep and warm when they rested on her, and Mateo's voice was barely more than a whisper of breath as he said, "Papa," afraid that speaking louder might cause the vision before him to dissolve like a dream, and Dominic knelt with open arms saying, "Hello, Bambino," and Mateo launched himself into his father's embrace, with such force they nearly toppled, as the boy sobbed with the weight of 2 years of longing, of nights staring at the empty place at the table, of whispered stories to school friends about the brave father he missed. And Dominic held him tightly with closed eyes as tears traced down the face of the man who had once been the most feared Mafia boss in Chicago, while Agent Chen stood nearby and explained softly to Elena that he had been released early because his cooperation had been exceptional, and the information he provided had stopped a major terrorist attack, and that the judge agreed he deserved freedom, adding that he had been out of prison for 3 days. And Dominic rose with Mateo still clinging to him and admitted it had taken him that long to gather the courage to come, and when Elena asked courage to do what, he replied softly that he had not been sure she would want to see him, not sure he had the right to step into the life she had built. And Elena looked at him for a long moment before telling him he was a fool if he thought they had built this life without him, stepping closer as she explained that every day for 2 years, Mateo had set 4 places at the dinner table, and every night he had asked her to tell stories about his brave father, and every morning she woke with a longing for him so sharp she could scarcely breathe, and when Dominic murmured her name she continued, saying he had given them safety and freedom and a chance at happiness. But he had forgotten one thing, and when he asked what she replied that happiness without him was not real happiness, and Dominic stared at her with eyes full of wonder and fragile hope, admitting he was not the man he once was, and that prison changed people, and she told him she did not care, even when he warned that he was still dangerous and that there were still people who might come after him. She insisted she did not care, and when he tried to say she deserved better, she silenced him by pulling him down into a kiss forged from 2 years of separation, longing and waiting. And when they broke apart, they were both breathless as she whispered that she deserved him, that they both did, and that if he dared to leave again, she would come find him herself. And Dominic laughed with a trembling disbelief, and asked whether she truly wanted this, and truly wanted him. And she answered that she had wanted him since the day he let her help his son, that she had loved him since the night he chose their safety over his freedom, and that she would go on loving him for the rest of her life if he allowed it. Then Mateo spoke again with hopeful eyes still damp with tears, asking whether this meant Papa was staying, and Dominic looked at his son, at Elena, at the small warm house behind them, Nothing like the marble mansion he once inhabited, but filled with love, and he said he would stay if they wanted him, if they believed there was room for a reformed criminal who loved them more than anything in the world. And Elena told him there was always room for him, taking his hand and telling him they had only been waiting for him to come home. Agent Chen departed after reminding Dominic he had to check in weekly and avoid contact with people from his past. And when the door closed, Dominic stood inside the small kitchen of the house he had never entered, but that somehow felt more like home than any place he had known. And he asked what came next. And Elena smiled and said, now they would eat breakfast, and then she would show him the house. And afterward they would figure out the rest of their lives together. And when he asked if it was truly that simple, she told him, it truly was. And Mateo tugged at his father with the same youthful excitement he had shown at 8 years old, declaring that Elena made the best pancakes in the world, and that Abuela was teaching him Spanish words his father would find very funny. And Dominic allowed himself to be pulled into the kitchen, where the elderly Mexican woman regarded him with curiosity and acceptance, and he watched Elena preparing breakfast while Mateo chattered endlessly about school and friends and a science project about fireflies. Dominic had spent his life building an empire of fear and power. Yet this small home with imperfect pancakes and laughter, with unconditional love and forgiveness, this was the kingdom he had always longed for without knowing it. Suddenly he said, I love you, and the kitchen fell silent as he continued, saying he loved both of them, loved the house, loved the life, loved the impossible second chance he had been given, and Elena came to him with a hand on his cheek and whispered that they loved him too, welcoming him home. Outside the window, the gentle Portland rain began to fall, washing away the dust of the past, and inside the small house, a family once broken by betrayal and violence began the slow, beautiful healing of a new beginning, a reminder that the greatest victories are sometimes won not with weapons or money or power, but with patience, forgiveness, and the belief that love can outshine even the darkest shadows of the past. As the emotional journey we have taken together reaches its end, the message it leaves behind lingers in the heart, reminding us that no one begins life perfect, but everyone deserves love and a chance to start anew. That family is not only blood, but those who choose to stand by us in our hardest moments, and that sometimes those the world calls different, like Mateo, are simply extraordinary souls waiting for someone to truly see them. How did this story make you feel? And did it remind you of anything from your own life? We would be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, like the video, and share it so more people can be inspired by meaningful stories like this. Because every subscription, every like, and every share is a powerful encouragement for us to continue creating heartfelt videos each day. We wish all of you watching good health, joy in your daily life, and peace in every moment. Thank you for staying with us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.